Hello, and welcome to the first edition of Conversation Corner, a new program of Ono Academic College and the Jerusalem Post. I'm the host, Mayan Hoffman, and I have with me here today an incredible lineup of experts in their fields to talk about some of the most pressing issues that the country is going to grapple with in the aftermath of the Israel-Hamas war. Welcome, Professor Tova Hartman, Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at Ono Academic College. We also have with us Yosef Cooperwasser. He is a retired brigadier general and a security expert. Thank you for being here. Of course, and last but certainly not least, we are fortunate to have with us Adi Brenzer, who is the head of the research department at the Bank of Israel.
Hi.
So I want to jump right in actually by starting with you, Yossi, because I think that we need to get just an idea of where we are holding today with regards to the security situation in Israel. Talk about the war up till now. Are we winning? Are we reaching our goals?
Everybody leaves the war, so it's not much that I can add to what everybody sees on the media. But I think, generally speaking, we are winning. Present continuous. We are winning. Every day that goes by, we win more. We take over a greater chunk of land in Gaza and deprive it from Hamas, and we deprive Hamas from the weapons they have. And we keep the threat over Hamas that we might eventually really defeat them and force them out of Gaza, and somehow, not totally clear how, release the hostages. That is also one of our goals, and create a new situation in Gaza where the Gaza Strip is not going to be anymore a threat for the state of Israel, a terror threat for the state of Israel. This is what we mean by winning. We are moving there. So the only problem is that in spite of the fact that we were trying, the leadership was trying, the military leadership, the political leadership was trying to convince the people of Israel that this is going to take a long time, this is a long war, don't expect immediate quick fix, and then that's it, we're going back to business as usual. In spite of that, there is still this expectation within the people that it's going to be shorter, that within a short while we should be able to finish this. And this is not going to happen. It's going to take time, because Hamas has built formidable infrastructure inside Gaza, beyond what's over the ground. There's so much underneath the ground, and we have to clean everything. And we are doing that while we are having our hands tied behind our back because of the hostages. We have to be very careful. And we have our hands tied because the Americans put pressure on us, and because we have to take into account the situation between us and Egypt. And we have problems with the Houthis in Yemen, and problems with Hezbollah in the north. And the Palestinian Authority controlled areas are not quiet either, and Jerusalem is not the most quiet place as well. There are so many tensions, and we have to remember we are doing all of that after we came out of an unbelievable torn society that characterized the situation inside Israel before the war started. So we are fighting the war with a very difficult condition. And also this malaise that we have because we were so totally and deeply surprised and lost so many people on 7th of October, and all of that is adding to the problems we have to face when we are moving towards winning. But we are winning. In spite of all of that, we are winning.
So you say we are winning. So if it's a long war, but there will at some point, or maybe it's even already today, that we need to start talking about the day after. How do we know when to start talking about it, that we're there? Let's start with that from a military perspective, just in a short answer, and then move to some other questions related. So Yossi, when we're fighting, there has to be an end. When will we know that we hit the place where the war is, even if we're going to maybe be in Gaza a little bit and do some mini operations, when do we feel that we are done with the bulk of this war?
Well, I think that we are. First of all, we are done with the bulk of the war gradually in certain parts of Gaza. In the northern part of Gaza, we are done with the bulk of the high intensity war. That's behind us. We are now in the lower intensity warfare, where at the same time we can already start thinking about the day after. It's going to happen in the center of Gaza, central area of Gaza as well, relatively soon. And there is a big open question about what's going to happen in the south, especially what's going to happen along the border with Egypt and in the city of Rafah. And the question is whether we are going to take over the control of this territory and be responsible for the people of Gaza. Because until now we managed to take over the territory of Gaza, much of the territory, but we didn't take any of the people of Gaza. And the day to start thinking about the day after, is the day after we take control of the people of Gaza. Otherwise, we don't care about the day after. But this is going to come one day. We still believe, there's still some sort of a belief in Israel that we can have a free land, that we can take over the territory without taking control of the people, and still say that we have won and release the hostages. It's a dream. I wish it would come true, but we cannot build on dreams. So we have to also prepare ourselves to harsh reality that we will have to take control of Gaza. Once we do that, we have to be prepared with a plan for the day after. I have a plan that I believe can work, but there are no good plans. Even my plan that I support is not an easy plan to be implemented. One thing I think is common in all plans. Everybody's plan has the same element regarding the military aspect. Everybody believes that Israel has to retain the overall security responsibility for Gaza, so that this would mean freedom of action for the military forces of Israel, both the IDF and the Shabak. Wherever they need to operate inside Gaza, they should be able to do that. And on that, we also had two other elements that are very important in the military aspect, which are the control of the Gaza-Egypt border, so to make sure that no arms are being smuggled in, and the control of what we call the perimeter, the area that separates Gaza from Israel, that we have to deploy forces over there. These forces should be able to move forward and maneuver inside Gaza if necessary. On these elements of the military aspect, everybody agrees. But the problem with the terrorism in Gaza is not only that. Of course, this is part of it. This is a major part of it, but it's not the only part of it.
And Yossi,
the other part of it that we have to deal with, just one second. The other part of it that we have to deal with in the day after is the narrative. We have to de-narrativize the Palestinians from the narrative of hatred and commitment to a struggle against Israel until its demise. That was the basic issue that allowed the people that carried out the attack on October 7th do what they did. It was all such joy and glee. So it's we have to be able to change that. This is not a message. This is not something that can happen in the month after or in the year after. This is a mission for 40 years after. And for that to happen, we have to arrange a new system that would govern the life of the citizens of Gaza in the future. There is also this dream also about the Gazans leaving. Maybe they were going to decide to leave. Whoever decides to leave, we wish him luck. But many of them are going to stay. And those who stay, we have to take care of their well-being on the one hand, and of their narrative at the same time, not less important.
Yossi, I'm going to cut you off because I want to make sure that we have time to hear about all the different aspects. But I think that all of us, Tova and Adi, we agree with that because, and this is something we're going to touch on because the people, whether it's the people in Gaza, the people in Israel, are going to be struggling collectively with the trauma and having to figure out how to have a conversation about how to move this forward, both from a security perspective, from a sociological and psychological perspective, from an economic perspective, and that all very, very closely ties together. A lot of the work we've been doing, even looking at the environmental perspective, says what's going to go on in Gaza is going to impact southern Israel and vice versa, from the tragedy that has ensued, and there's a lot of overlap there. I want to jump to you, Adi, real quick to talk about the economy, because I'm wondering from your perspective, is there a moment when we say, okay, the war is over, the economy is performing this way or that way? How do we look at the day after from an economic perspective?
Well, we will hopefully know when the military conflict is over, although, as Yossi explained, even this is not obvious. But this time it's not obvious that the economy will return immediately to normalcy. I think that this will depend on the outcome of the war, first of all, if the border areas are safe and calm, and if the Israeli public feels safe enough to bring back Palestinian construction workers. These are two key issues. I think to that, if these two things happen, then the immediate effects will not be large. If the military political outcome is different, then these segments of the economy, the border areas and the construction sector, may be stuck for quite a while. I think that unlike the previous conflicts during the past 2 decades that were both short and ended abruptly. I mean, we knew when it ended. It was very clear. I think the current war's impact on the economy seems to fade away gradually, because it lingers. In October, the economy took a major blow. We could see this in the labor market. About 20% of employees in Israel did not work. There are different segmentations of that, but basically 20% did not work. And also we saw low economic activity because people stayed at home, both for their own safety and because schools, workplaces, and various facilities were closed. Since then, we're already seeing the economy recovering each week. Basically, if we look at the data week by week, in some areas, we're back to normal levels, more or less. Some areas, the ones I specified, are still lagging. Particularly, the main vulnerabilities that remain are in the construction sector. The key issue there is the Palestinian workers, no longer the security situation. Basically, even in December, we think that about 50% of the construction sites were not operating. This is quite significant, and this is a sector which is about 7% of the economy, so half of that is quite significant. And on top of that, of course, both the northern border areas and the southern border areas are not functioning. And on top of that, tourism is a sector that is badly hit. I mean, we do have, unfortunately, a lot of experience with military conflicts. We know that tourism takes more than a year to recover usually, until we're back to normal. So I would say that if the military outcomes are what we expect, and there is a clear end to the war on the military front, we'll probably see the economy coming back to normal very quickly after that. There are lingering effects. I think we'll talk about this later, the day after, and questions that are related to that. But in terms of the activity, that should be quite quick. Of course, if people are not able to come back to the northern border or even to the southern border, if Israelis do not feel confident to have Palestinian workers back on the streets, then the impact is going to linger. And I would say just there is this sort of this magic solution to the problem of construction with foreign labor. It's not easy. It takes a very long time. You cannot bring 100,000 people from anywhere in the world here. Big question whether we want 100,000 people living in our streets, building our homes. So this may be an issue. This is a major question that emerged during this war, much more than in any previous conflict.
Yeah, I think that's actually been fascinating with our economy minister, Nir Barkat, really being very, very adamant about not allowing for these Palestinian workers back into the country. The dialogue just seems to keep continuing in the government meetings, and we can't seem to come to a conclusion. And meanwhile, they're not entering the country. So as you said, all of these things are stopped until we make some kind of decision. And I just spoke to Barkat recently, and he's recommending from India and other places. But the real question is, how do you get them even into the country? The bureaucracy in Israel, for people that live here, is so complicated, let alone...
It's not an issue of the bureaucracy in Israel, but just to give you two examples, one was Sri Lanka, the other one was Moldova.
Right.
In Moldova, there was a talk about let's allow people to come here privately rather than a government-to-government agreement. They talk about 10,000 Moldovan workers that will come in within a month. We're 3 months into the war. About 1,200 Moldovans were interviewed, 600 were seen fit to come, and about 200 are discussing coming to Israel. The figures with Sri Lanka are somewhat lower, but at the same environment. The only people that actually came back are the Thai workers who left during the war, for agricultural workers. These are the ones who really came back, but these are people that were here before the war. It's very difficult. It takes a lot of time, and all these magic solutions are just not there.
Right. So I want to jump to you. Speaking of magic solutions, there's really not a lot of magic solutions to the trauma that the country is experiencing in the aftermath of this disaster, of this massacre, and this disaster, and the war that's taken now more than 100 days. So of course, every aspect of all of our lives here on the ground are impacted. And I'm wondering if you can just kind of give an overview of what's also happening outside, because here in Israel, and most of our viewers are of course abroad, and here in Israel, we will talk about it, but we know sort of what we're going through. But the diaspora has also been very strongly hit by this war. So what are you seeing from your perspective in the dialogues you're having with Jews abroad?
Well, I think that we do not yet really know the extent of the trauma that is in Israel. And I think that we just say everybody's traumatized, this thousands and these thousands, but I don't think anybody has a clue yet the extent to which people are wounded. I mean, there's enormous resilience on the one hand in Israel, and therefore we sometimes, because of that, we seem to not focus on so many who have been wounded on many levels. And I think in this specific war, I think we use these two terms in the psychology of trauma, one of them being the loss of the assumptive world. And I think that is something that I think many, many people are going through. There is trauma always makes you feel shaky. But in this situation, there really is, people had certain assumptions. They had certain assumptions about their life, what they could expect, who is going to support them, who is the army, even knowing the whole history of the army and knowing that in this war people were more surprised or that, but there was a sense that we can count on our army and our government to be there for us. And I think in a very deep way, and this is something felt throughout all the populations in Israel, there's a loss of our assumptive world, and people are really reeling from that. I think in some sense abroad, it's similar. I think people knew about anti-Semitism. People knew about anti-Israel protests on certain campuses, and students were beginning to really struggle with that abroad. Communities were beginning to struggle, but they were more or less isolated incidents. But I think now people abroad, my colleagues in different universities, friends who are leading communities in synagogues and many other places are feeling how they're just this kind of big question mark. What we thought was yesterday, what we thought, who we could also count on. I mean, who would imagine the extent to which, I mean, even it's almost, in some places, it's almost, you could say it's comical, but it's not. I mean, all of gender studies departments all over the world are like hateful to Jews and to Israel in levels that it's like, here, like, what does this have to do? Schools of social work. I mean, and as students are really struggling, their teachers are struggling. How do we create safe environments? What does it mean to have a safe environment? Do we even begin to think in the States, in Canada, and other countries that we should not wear our kippah if you're a man, and that was how you used to dress? So again, I think abroad, they're dealing with the loss of the assumptive world. People thought this was not coming back to this extent. I mean, I think there was, there's times that there are anti-Israel, a little bit anti-Semitic, but I think the extent to which, and it has grown so much, and it has taken, it's so, I mean, it's so vocal and it's so central and it's being reported. So also, as things become reported, they also create realities and people are confused and they don't know how to respond. And I think people around the world are very confused.
Yeah, wow, it's really heavy. And I mean, I think that if we start to look at even the different sectors in Israel, there's something there with each of them too, as you're talking, that really has impacted them individually as a collective unit. Let's say, I mean, individually as a unit. So I mean, when we think about some of the different sectors in Israel, we're talking about the ultra Orthodox, the religious Zionists, the Arab Israelis, of course. And I think each of you would have things to talk about, both on different levels, from a security perspective, especially when we talk about the Arab Israeli community. We just this week had a terrorist attack in Ra'anana of people who've been working at locally for about a month and a half before they carried out the attack. It calls into question who we can trust from a security perspective, which Yossi you can talk to. We have ultra Orthodox people joining the army in many much larger percentage than in the past, which is also changing the dynamics of their connection to the state. And of course, there's been a disproportionate number of religious Zionist Jews that have been killed in this war so far, they're saying, largely because of them being commanders and being in some of these more elite military schools, which has led them to be in positions where they've been, killed, unfortunately, during the war. I'm wondering, Tova, if you can just speak from your perspective, how do you anticipate the evolution of the Haredi relationship with the state of Israel in the aftermath of the war?
So I would like to begin by saying that the relationship has been changing for a while. I think the war came as it was changing, I would say, with the ING. There's no major revolutions. I think that we need to stop speaking in a certain way about sectors as we used to speak. And so the idea of speaking about I always teach that, there is no as I teach adolescent psychology, there aren't the adolescents, right? So in a similar way, I think that we really see that in the Haredi community, there are many different groups, and those who began to want to be part of the economic sector of the state are becoming also part of other aspects of the state. And so I think that there's definitely more of an integration, a desire for an integration. And that's something that we've seen beginning to happen. And I think it will continue and it might grow. And I think we have, many of the other people. I mean, the issue that people feel often is, how is it that these are studying and we are fighting? And I think that break, and I think that suspicious attitude towards each other stays. It still is. It was. And I don't see the depth of that healing yet. But I do see larger groups of people who are moving and saying, I want to be part of the state. I don't want to live in poverty. I want to start integrating it into the economic sector. I want to work, and I want to work with dignity. And I don't want to live either on handouts or have, somebody tell me how much money I deserve or not. So I think that started before, and I think that will continue. And as people work with each other, see each other, and begin to know each other, things will happen. I mean, I think what we've had in Israel is, until you finish, until you're 18 years old, we don't know anybody who's different from us. The school systems are so segregated, and so that people from one community don't know people from, they haven't met a Haredi person hasn't met a secular person. But even within the different religious communities and the secular communities, we really grow up very insulated. And then in some sense in the army, we begin to meet other people. And then as we go out, the question is, where do we begin to work? What do we want to do? But I think that part still really exists in Israel. And unless there's an active intervention for things to change in that way, I think people will still live with, with their differences. I think what we are seeing, and we've seen it, and it's an incredible thing about Israel, and it's something that is really, I think, one of the sources of our resilience, is that at certain times, solidarity just does break all barriers, or many, many barriers. And I think we should be proud of that ability to have that kind of solidarity, that people really care about each other. And it didn't matter if 2 days before the war started, people who are on the left in the army were all saying, we're not going to do reserves. We're not going to do whatever we were told that we're going to do. We're refusing. I mean, literally within 5 hours, everybody came together around that certain goal. And I think that's a deep place of resilience. And one of the things that is very beautiful about our life here. And I wish we could have that solidarity, not only in times of war.
So, Adi, I want to go to you just about the Haredi community as well, because Tova touched on, even though it's not maybe looking as optimistic as I might have made it sound in the original question. And also now I'm hesitant to say the word the Haredi community because it's not the community. But the ultra-Orthodox, as Tova was describing, is actually diverse. And there may be more pockets or growing pockets that are getting more involved. If in the aftermath of the war, we do see that some of those who served in the army or maybe continue to be more involved, that has always been a sector that has been difficult for us economically, because their concern is that as it's a growing sector, but they're not as engaged in the economy, this could have an impact on the economy. Do you feel that there is a silver lining in the sense that as we come out of this, if we can grab hold of some of that enthusiasm and integration, we have an opportunity to improve our economy using the members of the ultra-Orthodox community?
I'll start by saying that it is a critical question for the Israeli economy as well as society. The numbers are talking. I mean, if we look down the road 20 years from now, 50% of the Israeli labor force are going to be either from the ultra-Orthodox population or the Arab population, and the integration of these two communities is critical. So far, we've seen very little progress. I mean, we do advertise a lot each success, but they're really minuscule. There are some success stories regarding ultra-Orthodox women who upscale their participation in the labor market. Predominantly, they still teach within their own sector. This is also true regarding male employment in the ultra-Orthodox sector. We see more jobs because this population has an increasing number of children, and so they need more schools for their own community. But the participation in the labor market, it exists, it's there, but the numbers are small. The same is true with respect to participation in military service. We've seen some pockets now during the war. Hopefully this could be a silver lining. This could be a point of change. For the most part, I think that the numbers are very small. I mean, when we talk about ultra-Orthodox men joining the army, we are talking in the hundreds, maybe 1,000 or so. That's very optimistic, I think. So in that respect, I mean, we all want to see that happening. So we take every success story and inflate it, but it's not large. And I think it's critical because as reserving this for the day after, but one of the things that are very likely to happen in the day after is that people in Israel will have to serve more time in the army. We've almost forgotten about reserve duty in the last 10 years or so, but this is coming back, and it's coming back large probably. And as other people are going to serve more in the military, also in the 3 years of service or somewhat longer service anyway, as young people, and then on reserve duty, I think that the need to see everyone else taking part of the burden is going to increase, and it's a critical question. So far, policy has not been successful in resolving this. It's not a question of resources. It's a question of really talk between communities and resolving this conflict in other ways. I think that then the economic benefits would be large. The economic costs of doing this are not very large, but the question is really to break down the mental diversion between communities.
So, I want to speak about another community, which is this Arab-Israeli community in Israel. We have about 20% of our population are Arabs living in Israel. That's not a small amount. As Adi just mentioned, it's a growing community like the ultra-Orthodox. In just different conversations that I've had with whether it's in the small business sector or with with some of the people living. I'm in from Jerusalem, and it's a very diverse community. So we have people from all walks of life living here, including a lot of Arab Israelis. And there's been, I've had friends that have said, "Oh, I won't take a cab if an Arab is driving. God forbid, racism is going up, and there's a real struggle." I'm wondering first, Yossi, if we can go to you though to talk about the security questions. How much are we attuned to the Arab Israeli population, and how connected is that population to either what's going on in the West Bank or what's going on in Gaza? Mayor Moshe Leon said to me the other day something very interesting. He said, Jerusalem is not Judea and Samaria is not Gaza, and obviously Jerusalem is not Gaza, in terms of talking about the populations, which I thought was interesting. But from a security perspective, are we at risk from our own citizens? That's number one. And number two, with us not allowing, for example, the Palestinian workers in over this time, a lot of these people, I'm assuming, are family members. What could that cause from a security perspective as well? This tension of people not being able to work, and some of them, of course, being enmeshed with the people that live here in, let's call it, inside the Green Line.
So that from a security perspective, already more than 3 months into the war, there's a positive surprise here that people were worried after Guardian of the Walls operation that we shall have Guardian of the Wall 2 with the Arab population revolting and rioting. This didn't happen, and we already can say it didn't happen. And there are all kinds of reasons for that. Amongst them, the brutality of the attack on 7th of October was not to the liking of the Arabs in Israel anyhow, and some Arab Israelis were killed by the Hamas during the atrocities of 7th of October. So this has helped convince them to keep committed to the tranquility. And I think this is something we have to cherish and build on, and see how we make it a jumping ball to improve relations with the Arab sector in Israel. And I think that unlike what's happening between Israelis and Palestinians living in Gaza and Palestinians living in even Jerusalem, I would say, but definitely not under the PA in the West Bank, the Israelis are appreciating what happened. And I think that we don't expect them to take part in the military, right? So it's we're talking about what they can do in get better integrated into the economy. They can contribute a lot here, and since we have to keep people in reserve duty, this is something that's going to be important in the future. And they have been going through a process of integration in Israeli society for a long while already. And it's part of them, at least. It's again this. Let's refrain from generalities. So it's, but part of them has been going through a process of integration, and this should be appreciated. And I think people feel, at least I don't know, I can speak of myself when I go to the pharmacist, and it's usually a lady from an Arab village. I feel totally fine with that, and I don't feel that something is wrong here. And I think that's the situation that prevails here. The fact that we had an Arab party as a member of a coalition a year ago, we almost forgot it, is also something to contribute in this respect. Not many people liked it, but or some people didn't like it, but it was a positive experience. They didn't speak in the wrong manner while they were in government, and they don't speak the wrong manner even now. And one incident with one of the members of Knesset that was questioning the 7th of October atrocities, whether they actually happened in the way they were portrayed, was answered by Mansour Abbas in a way that said, "No, we are not going to tolerate that." And this was a very positive message. So I think in the context of the relations with the Arab Israelis, we are we are off to a good start. But again, all of that is going to be dependent for big respect on what's going to happen in the war itself. We have to win the war. The entire day after is going to be looking one way if we win the war, and going to look a totally different way if we don't win the war. We have first to win the war in Gaza. Once we win the war in Gaza, many things are going to fall in place. One thing is true. I think what Adi said and what Ova said is very true, that the day after is going to be ruled by our fears more than by our expectations and hopes. And secondly, that we should have to adopt a new national security concept that would demand from us much more than what we were ready to give as society beforehand. We were so busy in lowering the level of the defense burden that we reached a point where we, and this was based, by the way, not only on our imagination, but also on our feeling that the relevant scenario that we have to be ready to does not include something like 7th of October, and I'm not referring only to the Gaza part of it, but also the entire regional development. So now we have to face that we are living in a totally different reality. I hope that we shall be able to win the war in Gaza and mend fences with Saudi Arabia and enlarge the Abraham Accords and push Hezbollah north and put an end to the Iranian nuclear threat. And this is great. And this all depends on us having extremely good relations with the United States. And if we manage to do all of that, it's going to be easier, but it's going to take time before we do all of that. And the time is going to need us to invest very much more in defense, and we shall have to compensate that by improving the relations with the Arab sector and improving the relations with the ultra-Orthodox sector and all of those things. These are the idle capacities that we have that we didn't. The Israeli Zionists, we felt that we can handle this burden by ourselves. Not only that we can handle it, we were so successful that we were producing so much wealth that we could take care of the Arabs, we could take care of the Orthodox, we could still deter all of our enemies, and fly every weekend not every weekend, once a month to Europe to enjoy good music or whatever. This was our feeling as the Zionists. The Zionists are really a unique group of people that have the capability to produce a lot of wealth. And, but now we have to realize that we have to share this wealth also on much more of it on defense, and take advantage of the fact that throughout those years we had some idle capacities here, and get them more integrated.
So I want to jump into looking abroad, at the communities abroad. Tova touched on it a little bit in terms of the anti-Semitism and some of the very difficult experiences that our brothers and sisters abroad, not only in the United States, really worldwide, are experiencing in the aftermath. But I think that there are not just the Jewish diaspora, but there is an entire the all eyes on Israel in some ways, and maybe we just feel that way sometimes ourselves. But Adi, let's talk a little bit about the credit rating agencies, okay? Looking in, and investors. What does the day after look like for that? Are people, I know the investment has sort of been down, TASE is kind of going back up, the shekel is strengthening again, but Moody's is in town today. I was told, that this week they're in the country and they're going to be deciding again as to what to do with our credit rating. So what happens to Israel from an investment perspective the day after? Are we going to be okay? Will it go back to where it was? We were already seeing a lot of decline.
Yeah, I think that one of the common perceptions, erroneous perceptions here, is focusing on the credit agencies. The credit agencies usually lag the markets. Usually, there is this kind of joke of economists, at least, that the best predictor for a credit downgrade is a bankruptcy. So sort of the companies are moving behind the market. And the markets have already downgraded Israel to a BBB level. That's the level at which the bonds of the Israeli government, the dollar government bonds of Israel, are trading, similar to Mexico, for example. We have some other market indicators that show the same result. We look at the stock exchange in Israel, for example, and we're very happy that stock prices are at about the same level at the pre-war level. But in the meantime, the world markets have moved up by 20%, and et cetera, et cetera. So the markets are responding, but the markets are also stable in a way that, there is a downgrade of Israel, but not in a way that the markets are anticipating some kind of collapse. And the question is, basically, when the war is over, will depend first and foremost on the war results. I mean, I think that there is a very clear correlation. If you look at the foreign exchange market, for example, whenever there are news about escalation in the north, the dollar is increasing, and whenever things are coming down, the dollar is coming down. So, whatever happens in the economy, the key issue is the security situation. Then there is, of course, a question of what will Israel do? We just finished a cabinet meeting yesterday about the budget. And I think that the message that we delivered as the Bank of Israel was that the key issue is not how much the war costs, it's much more what is the lagging effect of the war in terms of defense expenditure in the coming years. Because we think that the markets can swallow a 200 billion shekel debt accumulation during the war. If it's a one-off, it will take time to pay that. It will also stay in the form of interest payments, but that's one thing. It doesn't explode. What explodes is if you increase the deficit by 40 billion shekels, but that's a constant amount that we're going to carry from now on. And the whole discussion in the cabinet in the last 2 days was about how to handle this permanent increase in expenditure in a way of offsetting measures. The government has, at least at the cabinet decision, it's not finalized yet in terms of Knesset approval, has broken a psychological barrier that existed for quite a while, and that's raising taxes. There's probably no way but to raise taxes if we want to pay for that. But this is the one key thing that the markets are looking at. Are the people that make decisions in this country responsible in a sense that we understand that we have to do what we have to do in terms of security, in terms of defense expenditure, but we are also willing to pay for it. We're not looking for all kinds of magical solutions that, things will just go away. And so in that respect, this is something that they look at. Rating agencies themselves also look, and they always state that the geopolitical situation of Israel is a key concern for them. And that talks about security, but also talks about relations with the U.S. are an anchor for the stability of Israel. We saw that during the current war. We've also seen this during previous economic crises, that the U.S. stepped in and helped Israel, be it 1985, 2003, the U.S. government was here to support us in various ways. And also the third key thing that the markets will look at is policy quality. Having all these responsibilities, the question is what we are spending our money on. And I think that here, there's always this temptation to say, well, we have a war, we have a crisis, that's an opportunity to overhaul things. I think that the Israeli economy was doing very well before the war. It was doing very well before COVID. So in a way, first of all, coming back to where we were is not a bad thing. Once we get there, I think that looking forward, there are some key issues. We've been pointing them out for quite a while. Investing in infrastructure, in particular transportation infrastructure and energy infrastructure facing the greener world that we're moving on to, that's going to be costly. Upscaling the education system in Israel, that's something. Bringing in the Arab population into the labor market depends on expenditure on the education sector. Once the ultra-Orthodox step in, of course, that too. So all these things were the key to doing all these good things. The only question is, how do we do that now with the additional expenditure on defense? And that's going to make these things even more difficult than they were before the war.
So kind of a scary situation, and thinking about getting the taxes raised, I just want to put out there, but we guess we'll watch and see what happens. Tova, I want to jump over to you to talk about, what's going to be going on in the United States and everywhere, but specifically in the United States, where there's been a 300% plus rise in incidents of anti-Semitism since the start of October 7th. There's been terrible protests, and the Jews, as you mentioned before, are sometimes thinking, am I even feeling safe enough to put on a kippah? So while the credit ratings might be following our trends, or the credit agencies, and saying, well, we'll wait till the bankruptcy to knock us down, the Jews abroad are sort of already being knocked down and really experience a very difficult period as we speak. So the day after, when the war effectively quote unquote ends, or we're doing what Yossi said, monitoring from the outside, we're in charge of security, but the war itself is over. What happens to the fact that all this anti-Semitism came out of the woodworks in leaps and bounds, and how does the community go on?
So I think I'm less optimistic about the end of the war, in the sense just that even when the war ends, the amount of walking wounded is very great. I think, being like I teach in university in Ono, already our students, the idea, we're trying to think, how do we bring our students back to start studying? In every plan we have, we always have also plan B, plan C, a devotion and a commitment to every soldier who comes back, and to every spouse of a soldier who was alone for these few months. How do we help them, begin to study, to begin to believe there's a tomorrow for them? And I'm answering now, even though that you asked first about the United States and that. So I think also I think there's a lot of walking wounded as well, and a lot of confusion. And I think that how do we respond to situations of anti-Semitism, and I do think it has been tied together with how do we respond to issues of anti-Israel? Is it anti-Israeli? Is it anti-Semitic? What is it? Is it just a group of undergraduates who just talk the way they feel like talking, spitting poison, and then, things will come back? So I do think that when students, or when just people are hearing the terms that we are doing a genocide is happening, we're a colonial country, Israel then becomes a burden. And it also becomes very complicated for people who want to say, I need to defend Israel, but how do I defend Israel? And what does that have to do with my Jewishness, my Jewish identity? And I think here we have an opportunity to begin to have conversations in ways that we haven't had before between Israel and diaspora. I think things are changing, and I think we need to be there and to train people to, be able to effectively influence and be there for people who need our support. And I think that we have a chance to start supporting our brothers and sisters all over the world in a way that we haven't had before. And we haven't done it before because it so often was their Jewish identity was sort of part of Israel, of Israeli. They were proud or they were less proud, and they went on with their lives and they supported certain things here. And I think now we're going to have to change a little bit of those equations. I think we need to hear, first of all, which is something often hard for us here in Israel, we have to hear in what ways they're wounded, in what ways they have needs, and not to come to say, we have the solution, tell us maybe what's your problem. But to actually really see there's different kinds of communities. There's younger communities, there's older communities. There are those who are more frightened. There are those who are less frightened. There are those who, and I really would say that we have an opportunity now, and I think we have a commitment, and I think we should be doing it, is to really trying to listen and to really seeing what are your challenges and how do we reconnect in a way that we both grow in this relationship.
So we're running out of time. We only have really a few more minutes for everybody to be able to comment. And I want to be able to get to some final thoughts. Everybody in, 60 seconds, 90 seconds maximum, I want to hear how we want to wrap up this conversation about the day after. What is the final message that our viewers, our listeners need to be able to get? Yossi, why don't you start? Then we'll go to Adi, and then Tova, you'll wrap it up for us. Final thoughts, Yossi.
Yes. Well, I think we should be getting ready to grapple with the day after. So it's the fact that we have this conversation is very important, and I think that it should be conducted in many other places as well. There's this group of people that try to depress us, that say, well, we're not going to be able to get the goals of the war, and things are going to be terrible, and so on and so forth. I would take them seriously, but we have to make sure that they are not correct. It's up to us. We have to understand that much is up to us in defining the way the day after is going to look like. And the most important thing in my mind in the day after is that we don't return. Adi spoke about returning to the situation that was before, and maybe from the economic point of view, it was a good one. But from a national security point of view and from a unity point of view, the situation was very bad. And I suggest that we decide not to speak to each other the way we spoke to each other before, and to take advantage of the unity that Tova mentioned before, and really make the best out of it. Because if there's one thing that the war did to us, is realize how bad the situation was. And I'm so afraid that there are so many people that are really want to go back to where we were before. And I sincerely hope that we should not make this mistake now. And that is the most important thing that will define our day after. We shall find solutions for Gaza. We shall find solutions for Iran. We shall even find solutions to how we shape our relations with the United States. But finding a way to respect each other, this is the most important thing that we have to work on.
Adi, your final thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Adi, do you want to share your final thoughts?
Yeah. I think that our experience, unfortunately, we have a lot of experience in dealing with crisis. And I think that again and again, the Israeli economy has shown that it is a very resilient economy. We know how to take a hit and come back strong and better. And I think that this is what we are seeing now. I mean, it is, I think, quite surprising for most people in the world to see that the Israeli economy within a war situation with tens of thousands and more than that, people on reserve duty, having the economy rebounding the way it did from where we were in October to where we are now. I think that the key issue is that it's not going to this time, because the hit is much worse than we had before. It's not going to happen on its own. It depends a lot on what we will do, but I think that as long as we do the right things and they're not extremely difficult, I think the Israeli economy is going to come back. I think that we have the foundations to do that, both in terms of a very diverse high-tech sector that knows how to carry on, even with the difficulties of missing. I just visited yesterday a company that has 20% of its labor force on reserve duty, and they're still delivering to the full extent. So I think as long as we do what we need to do, we're going to come back strong from this crisis as we did before.
Tova, final thoughts.
Yeah, I think that we have to make sure that Hamas doesn't win. And I would go even what Yossi began, and I would like to sort of build upon that we cannot allow us to be, to think of the Arab communities in Israel as the enemies. We cannot allow other kinds of people to dictate what it meant for us and what our vision of a shared society could look like. And I think that's something that I know in the college, we're spending a lot of time thinking, how do we integrate back the different kinds of populations? What does it mean to sit together? What does it mean that we all need to listen to each other? That we can't say we own pain or we own, whatever it is that we think. Every small group is so sure, we compete with each other on many emotional, we're more afraid, you're more afraid, we don't like you don't, there's kinds of things. And I think that the day after will be that we're going to have to do and continue to do a lot of work. But I hope very much that we will really work hard to build a shared society, that we will really try, and we'll be knocked down in different ways. And I think what the present now has shown us is that we don't really have a roadmap for that. We really don't yet know exactly what would be the nature of relationships between the groups and the communities in Israel. And so we're going to have to really try. And I hope that we can take our bravery that we've exhibited now to a bravery in a different way, and in a way of saying, how do we go on from here? How do we look at all the different people who live in Israel and say, we all are going to sit around this table and we all have a place around this table? And I hope and pray that that is something that we'll be able to begin to work on, even if we're going to be walking wounded, but to say that's really one of the only ways for us to heal as a community.
Thank you. So we've had with us today Professor Tova Hartman, Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at Ono Academic College, Yossi Cooperwasser, who's the security expert, a retired brigadier general, and of course, Adi Brenzer, the head of the research department at the Bank of Israel. This has been Conversation Corner, a new project of the Jerusalem Post and Ono Academic College. Thank you for joining us.